Hey viewers, we are back with another interview. We are joined by Jane, a local resident who is passionate about our village's history. We are on the location at the Metcalfe fairgrounds. Jane, how long have you lived in the village?
I was born in the Metcalfe area, and I moved into the village in 1995.
How did you become interested in local history?
I bought an old house in Metcalfe that's like 125 years old, and I really wanted to know who used to live in this house when it was first built, and who were the neighbors, and what was their life like 100 years ago in Metcalfe. So I started doing research to find out about what the place was like.
Very interesting. Can you tell us what is important about this location in Metcalfe's history?
Okay, well, this building we're standing in right now is the grandstand at the Metcalfe Fairgrounds. So the Metcalfe Agricultural Society started holding fairs in 1856. So that's way more than 150 years ago. This particular building was built in 1891, and it was all built with local lumber that was cut from local farms, and it was brought in by one of the local sawmill owners, Pink and Rolston, they ran a big sawmill in the middle of Metcalfe. That was a big business here. And they built this grandstands for the fair, but it's been used for all kinds of different events since then. So during the fair, people would sit on these stands to watch horse races here. And between fairs, they might come out and watch baseball games here. It's been used people have been sitting in these stands for way more than 100 years now, 125 years at least. And what I really like about this building is that I know that, between the fairs, when nothing else is going on, you get a lot of students coming to hang out in these stands. And almost any day of the year, if you come by before school, you'll find there's a bunch of teenagers hanging out in these stands. And I like to think that that is a part of ordinary history in Metcalfe. I'm sure that the week after they built this building, there were kids from the high school coming down here to hang out and talk about stuff and maybe steal a cigarette, who knows. And when the boys were thinking about whether or not they would go off to fight in the First World War, they came down here and they sat and talked to themselves about big issues like that. And before the Second World War, you can be sure that some of the boys and girls came down here to talk about what was this war all about and should they be going away. And even now, students come down here and probably talk about whether they should go to college or go to university, what they should be doing with their lives. And we still see that. So it's this continuing piece of history going on. And one of the interesting things about these stands is you'll find that when kids have been hanging out here, they've been carving their initials in the seats. And if you look at the planks in this building, you can find examples where people have carved their names and their initials that go back for 50, maybe even 100 years. Some of these planks are that old. So I invite people to come down here and have a look and see how many different names you can find carved into the seats on these stands.
All really interesting. I'm going to try to find some of those names after. But let's go to our next location. We've wandered over to the large tree behind the market building. Jane, can you tell us what is it about this tree that makes it so special?
Yes, this I believe may be the oldest tree in Metcalfe. This is an American white elm. And American white elms can grow to be as old as 300 years. This one, I don't know if it's quite that old, but it could easily be 200 years old. And there are no other trees in Metcalfe quite that old. And what I think is really interesting about it is that this tree probably started growing here before the European settlers arrived. So you all hear in school when we say the land acknowledgement that we know that we stand on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Well, before the settlers arrived in Osgood Township, there were Algonquin people who lived here. And when this tree was young, there were Algonquin people in the community living in this area. And they went on living in this area on and off after the settlers arrived. The settlers arrived in about 1828, the very first ones, and there were quite a lot of people here by the 1830s and the 1840s. But in that period, there were still Algonquin people who would come into this area in the wintertime to hunt and to live. And in the summertime, they would go down to Lake of Two Mountains, where all the Algonquin people from the Ottawa Valley would gather together and fish for the summer. And they'd meet up and they'd have their weddings and baptize their babies and maybe hold funerals. And then when the summer was over, they would go back up the Ottawa Valley and live all over the valley, and they would hunt. And so I like this tree because it gives that a little sense of Indigenous history. It's all that's left of that time period. I also think this is a really interesting tree because this is an elm. And the elms were subject to a big pandemic in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And all the big elms in Osgood Township died. And all you have left now are really small ones. But this one is still left here because it was socially distanced from all the other trees. It stands alone in the middle of the fairgrounds. And the bugs that carry the Dutch elm disease could not fly far enough to reach this tree. So that's why this is the only elm left in our whole village that's really big and mature. So that's what I think special about this tree. So you need to come and look at it someday.
Very interesting. Is there anything we haven't covered about the fairgrounds that you would like to share with us today?
Well, the people have been holding fairs here since 1856, so that's a very long time, and it's a great tradition. It's a great piece of living history, the fair, because you can come down here and participate in the fair every fall, the last weekend of September, first weekend of October, and it's been going on for 150 years, and even in the middle of the pandemic this year, we had a bit of a small celebration for the fair, and I'm sure once the pandemic is over, we're going to have a fabulous, great fair, so I hope everybody comes down and joins in that piece of living history.
Our final question for all of our guests is, how would you finish this sentence? My Metcalfe is.
Well, my Metcalfe is full of history. Everywhere you look, there's different pieces of history, modern history and ancient history in this one little village that we live in. So I encourage people to think about all the old buildings and the people who used to live here before.
Viewer, thank you, Jane, for joining us and sharing a little bit about our village's history. Viewers, if there's a building in Metcalfe that you would like to learn more about, please let us know in the comments. Thank you for tuning in. See you around town.